Hey everyone, welcome to Reading Today, or as we wrap up the book The Giver. Just a couple of reminders. One of your main assignments today is going to be to practice your vocab words. Our test will be on Tuesday when we get back to school. Remember, we don't have school to Friday this week or Monday of next week. Okay, so we won't be back till Tuesday. So here's the concern I have with that. With the extra days off, I don't want you to forget your vocab words. So my encouragement to you is really practice today, and maybe even practice a little bit Monday night before we get back to school on Tuesday, so you can really ace this test on Tuesday, okay? So after you do your practice round, if it doesn't go well today, practice some more, okay? So I've been seeing, as you've been sending your scores into me the last few days for how you did on those practice tests and learning mode that we've done, I've seen some really good scores and some that could use a little work yet. So if you do really, really well and pass all the words, awesome, then you can probably be done. But if you get a 40% or a 60% or 70 or 80%, which are like C's and D's and things like that, if you would get that same score on the test next week, I would encourage you to practice some more, okay? The more you practice, the better you'll do. So just an encouragement to really take seriously the chance to study over this weekend for those vocab words, okay? And then we'll talk about the end of the book today. I'm excited to do that. There's some interesting things that happen, as you saw, and maybe even was a little confusing too. So we'll see if we can clear up a little bit about how that book ends and what's going on. All right, I want you to open up to 163 if you're in the black book, or 204 in the white book. Okay, look for the word meticulously. Second paragraph of chapter 21, it says this: "But that evening everything changed, all of it, all the things they had thought through so meticulously fell apart." So remember, they had this perfect plan or how he was going to leave at midnight the day before the ceremony and no one would notice him, but all of a sudden he had to leave earlier. You know why? Because he heard that Gabe was going to be released. And so all that planning that they did so meticulously fell apart. Meticulously means just really carefully or precisely. So all these carefully laid plans or precise plans that they had all figured out fell apart because all of a sudden they had a twist in their plans with the realization that if Jonas didn't run away and take Gabe with him, Gabe was going to be released. He was going to be killed, right? So that made them have to speed up the plan a little bit faster. 166, or if you're in your black book, 208. We're looking for languid. It's in the middle of the big middle paragraph. Okay, I'm going to go up a few lines, so about 3 lines down in the middle of that big paragraph, it says, "Before he had left the dwelling, he had laid his hands firmly on Gabe's back and transmitted to him the most soothing memory he could. A slow swinging hammock under palm trees on an island someplace, at evening with a rhythmic sound of languid water lapping him hypnotically against a beach nearby." So he's gave Gabe this memory of like being right next to like an island with water, and there was a little beach nearby. The rhythmic sound of languid water. Languid really means like peaceful or relaxing. Maybe some of you find it peaceful or relaxing to hear the ocean waves crashing against the beach or the trickling of water in a river or something like that. And that's what Jonas is describing here. He gave Gabe a memory of some languid little beach scene, relaxing scene where the water was gently crashing against the shore and a soothing sound so that Gabe would stay asleep while he ran away, right? And then subtle. This is a silent B in this word. We don't say subtle. We say subtle, as if the B wasn't even there. So if you're in the white book, it's on 214. If you're in the black book, 171. It's right away at the beginning of chapter 22. Easy to find. It says, "Now the landscape was changing. It was a subtle change, hard to identify at first." Here would be an example of a word where you get the definition right in the context. Sometimes the authors will do that. They'll use a hard word like subtle, and then in the very next phrase, they tell you what the word means. Do you see? It was a subtle change, something that was hard to identify at first. Subtle is something that's hard to notice or easy to miss, or it's very small. So, if I came to school one day wearing my glasses, which I really don't like to wear very much, some of you have never seen me in my glasses, that would not be a subtle change. That would be easy to notice, right? You'd notice right away. That's the opposite of subtle. Something that would be subtle, though, is like if I got a haircut and then you guys would notice that wouldn't be a subtle change. But then, like, let's say a week later I got a haircut again and they barely cut off any hair. Now, maybe if you were really observant, you'd notice, but it would be such a subtle change. Because if you get a haircut 1 week after getting another haircut, that barely changes the length of your hair, right? That would be too subtle for you to notice. And as Jonas is moving along in chapter 22, the landscape around him, the way the land looked, was changing a little bit. Not much that he didn't notice right away, but then eventually he began to see how, wow, he's getting to more and more forests because he's getting further and further away from some of those communities, right? And it was subtle at first. He hardly noticed. And all of a sudden he's like, oh, whoa, there's a lot more trees, right? So subtle means hard to notice or easy to miss, very small change, right? So subtle, very small. So let's talk about the last two chapters. Some interesting things happened. So what did Gabriel see that he thought was a plane? What was one of the new things that Jonas and Gabriel saw that was new to them? So he saw some birds, right? And in the community, they didn't have any birds. And so Gabe thought it was a plane. He's never seen birds, and Jonas either. And then they realized that these were living creatures and birds. You know, they also saw some other animals. A deer, I think, was one of the other animals. And they saw a tailed creature that I thought or imagined to be a fox, I think is what they saw. Or who knows exactly what it was, because they didn't even know the name for it. They just had to kind of describe it. So they saw all kinds of new nature that they never got to see in the community, right? Animals like that are kept out of the community. Number two, what made Jonas begin to wonder if he had made the right choice to leave? Why did he decide he had really no choice at all? You know, when he was starving and thirsty, and Gabe was starving and thirsty and physically exhausted, he wondered, you know, if he had just stayed, he wouldn't be going through all this pain and suffering right now. And so then he decided he had to leave, number one, because Gabriel would have died if he had stayed, right? And he's like, it's not even living to not have colors and memories and things like that. So if I had stayed, it would have been like I was dead anyways, because there would be no memories or color or anything. It's just not worth living life that way. So he realized he really had no choice at all. He had to go. What made Gabriel cry at the end of the chapter? So Gabriel was such a good sport this whole time, right? You know, this part really tugs at my heartstrings because I think of my son Aiden, who probably wasn't much older than what Gabriel was, and Jonas just has to cry because Gabriel's starving and hungry and basically dying, right? And just sad and beyond, you know, being able to comfort. And that made Jonas cry too, because he wasn't sure he could save this poor little baby. And he didn't have anything to give this poor little baby. That's a hard thing. You know, I think of when Aiden was sick recently, not with the coronavirus or anything, don't worry, but, you know, about a couple months ago, he kind of got the flu, I think it was, and he was throwing up and couldn't eat. But so when you're that way, you're not supposed to eat food, right? But a little baby like Aiden or Gabriel wouldn't understand that, and so Aiden was begging for food all day, and it just broke my heart because I couldn't give it to him, because I know if I did, he would throw up, and that wasn't good for him, right? So I can only imagine what Jonas was going through there as this little poor baby was begging for food and wanting to eat, and he couldn't do anything about it. That just made him cry. It's kind of a sad part of the story, wasn't it? And then at chapter 23, it said at the beginning of the chapter, what made travel even more difficult and dangerous? All of a sudden it started snowing, right? He was kind of going up a mountain, and it was getting more and more snowy to the point where it was impossible even to bike, right? And slippery and dangerous. What memories did Jonas use for himself and Gabriel when he felt he could go no longer? So his memories were starting to fade away, right? It was working just like he and the giver had planned, that as he got further and further from the community, his memories were fading and going back to the people in the community. It makes you wonder how they're doing, right? Back in the community, they're probably freaking out and going to the giver looking for help because their memories are coming back, both of good things and of bad things. So maybe they were starting to see color and stuff, but they're also having memories of war and pain and things like that come back to them. So what memories did he give to Gabe and himself? Memories of the sun, right, and warmth and things like that, to try to warm him up. And it was hard because those memories were getting weaker. When Jonas got to the top of the hill, what did he find? Guess what? There's the sled, right? Wasn't that interesting? Just like he saw in that memory from the giver. And it makes you wonder and think, you know, what exactly was going on, right? Why is this the same as his memory that was? Before I move on to talk about the ending of this book today, into him, and then you had one more question in your own words, in at least 3 sentences, to describe how the story ends, what's happening. So I want you right now to look at the very end of that story. 179, if you're in the black book, the very bottom. Okay, and then if you're in the white book, just go to the last pages of the book. It says, downward, downward, faster and faster. So he jumps on the sled and he goes down. Suddenly he was aware with certainty and joy that below, ahead, they were waiting for him, and that they were waiting too for the baby. For the first time, he heard something that he knew to be music. He heard people singing. Behind him, across vast distances of space and time from the place he had left, he thought he had heard music too, but perhaps it was only an echo. So what do you think is happening? I'm going to let you know right now that the author, Lois Lowry, purposely left this ending ambiguous. We'll talk about that word in a second, but that means open-ended, that there's no true final, here's exactly what happened. this author wanted you to kind of come up with what do you think is happening. So I know that maybe it's kind of frustrating for some people, but notice I will give the details of what the author does say. Jonas gets on the sled, slides down the hill, and when he gets to the bottom, he hears people singing. Sounds like people are celebrating. He hears music, kind of seems to come like up to a house, right? And see some rooms with people inside, and he thinks that, hey, they're waiting for him, and they can go in there and be welcomed, and that's what all the book tells us, right? And then it also says that he thinks maybe hearing, back in the village from where he left, or the community where he left, he hears singing too. So maybe their memories have come back of music and things like that. But that's interesting, right? And so, what exactly you felt was happening at the end, there's really no right answer or wrong answer. And so I had you to describe in 3 sentences what you think was happening at the end. Lois Lowry purposely left it open. And later on when they interviewed her about this book, I looked this up, she also said that she did that on purpose. And when they tried to ask her what really happened to Jonas, what was going on, did he get rescued? What happened? And she said, I'm not going to tell you. She said, stop asking me, because she didn't want to give it away or make people think the ending ended a certain way. What she said. And so here's some other notes about this ending and what Lois Lowry has told us since then. Okay, here's that fancy word, ambiguous. Ambiguous means open-ended. There's no really right answer. So there's a few things that probably could have happened, okay? The most, maybe immediate way to think about it, or the most maybe simple way to think about it, is that Jonas, here's an explanation. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but this is something from Lois Lowry and some people who have studied this book, that Jonas did find another civilization of people, that he found another community where they do have music and singing and joy and emotions like that, and he was about to be saved when he slid down the snow to them. And they were going to hopefully take him in and nurse him back to health, and the baby too, right? So certainly you can view the ending that way. That would not be a wrong way to see it. But there are many people who don't think that this actually was happening. When somebody is dying or someone's really weak, picture someone is in a desert who hasn't had water in a couple of days, and they're dying. They need water now. What do they begin to see? They begin to have visions, because when your brain starts to shut down and die, your brain starts to go crazy and sometimes see things that aren't there. And so someone in a desert might start to see water that doesn't really exist, a mirage, we would call that, right? So there are some people who think that Jonas is so weak that he's seeing only a vision of like a home or people singing, and that they're not really there. This is just him dying and his brain shutting down and his last memories before he passes away and falls over in the snow. And so that the sled and all of that were not really real. And the reason they argue that is because there's some things that Jonas says that really don't make a lot of sense. So, here's some examples. The idea that he heard music all the way back in the community where he came from. Remember, he's been traveling for a long time. There's no way he could possibly hear music. Now, he just said he had the sense of it, so maybe he's not really hearing it. But that right there makes you wonder if his brain is just going a little bit crazy, right? And then this statement that he made, that when he got to that home at the bottom of the hill, they were waiting for him, and they were waiting for the baby too, which again doesn't seem to make much sense. Why would people be waiting for Jonas if no one knew Jonas was running away, right? Besides him and the giver. So maybe this is just Jonas's brain imagining as he dies and passes and fades away in the snow that, he's going to be rescued and they're waiting for him, and this is the family that he's been waiting for. So, for that reason, some people think that this is actually Jonas's last thoughts before he dies. It's a little bit of a sadder ending than, hey, he's rescued versus he dies, right? Those are kind of the two different main opinions. And I'm sure there are other opinions out there too about what you think really happened at the end of the book. But the author purposely left it, here's that word again, ambiguous. The author kind of wanted you to create your own ending in your head. Now, maybe that frustrated you. I remember reading this book the first time and being like, what, that's it? There's nothing else? And maybe you were kind of frustrated by that too. But in a way, the more you think about it, I think the more fun the ending gets. That you can really kind of make it what you want. I think the first time I read it, I assumed he lived. He got to the bottom of the hill, and the giver had given him this memory, thinking that, or maybe the giver knew something, that there was a sled out there that if Jonas traveled a long distance, he'd find, and then he could slide down and find this community. So, that's kind of how I thought of it at first. But the more I think about, too, some of these hints that maybe this is Jonas's brain going a little bit crazy. right before he dies, the more I can also see that argument too, that maybe this is Jonas's last thoughts before he passes away. So I'd be curious to think about how did you view the ending? Again, maybe your idea of the ending wasn't any of these two. Those are just the most common two ways that people have viewed the ending of The Giver. And again, the author purposely left it without a real right answer. It's kind of interesting, right? Now, I want to let you know that Lois Lowry did write additional books in this series. So if you really like this, there are 2 more books. There's one called Gathering Blue, okay, and there's one called The Messenger and the Sun. Sorry, 3 more books in this series. Now, when Lois Lowry wrote The Giver, she did not intend to write any more books. So when she wrote this, the ending was supposed to just be open-ended, ambiguous like this. Now, I will let you know, without spoiling too much about these other books, I actually haven't read them, but I've read about them and have people told me about them, is that Jonas is a real character in at least 1 or 2 of those books. So later on, she decided that she would have him be alive for the remaining stories. But when she wrote this, she herself said, I just wanted this to be an ambiguous ending, where there's no clear answer of what actually took place. And she kind of wanted people to see that, there are consequences to having emotions. Emotions are good, right? Love and colors and things like that are good, but because of the sinful world we lived in, now she wouldn't have said the sinful world. I don't know if she's a believer or not, but those emotions and things can also come with some bad sides, right? Love can lead to rejection sometimes, or divorces if there's a married couple who loved each other at one point, right? And colors can be very good, but can cause people to hate each other because of the colors of their skin. So Lois Lowry really wanted you just to have these strong emotions about this book, and that's kind of the theme of this book, isn't it? That certainly life without emotions and feelings and love and things like that is kind of a meaningless life. But we have to be careful with those things too, that those things don't destroy us or that we don't hurt other people with those things, right? So I think this is a really deep book that definitely tugs on your heartstrings and your emotions in some places, especially with that baby Gabe, at least for me, okay? So that's the ending, guys. Let me know how you felt about it. I'd love to hear via email or some messages or texting to me what you really truly thought of the ending and which ending in your head you pictured. Did you picture him living and he was really actually finding this village and community where they were going to welcome him and baby Gabe? Or were you one of those people who saw, no, I think this is him dying and his last thoughts that are just kind of daydreams or visions before he passes away with his brain going crazy because some of the things he says and thinks about really don't make a whole lot of sense. It's really up to you. And if you had something else, we'll call it number 3, whatever else you thought of, that's cool too. I'd love to hear what your thoughts were. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this book. I think a lot of you did. This is definitely one of my probably top 10 books of all time that I've read besides the Bible. So I hope you enjoyed it too. There is a movie. I think I've told many of you that now. So if you're interested in watching the movie, it's very similar to the book. They do change some things. One of the biggest things is Jonas looks to be about 17 in the movie. And in our book, he's only 12, right? And so there's some differences, but McCord just watched it recently. He said a lot of it does match up with the book. So it's a PG-13 movie, so you'd have to ask your parents about it. And I think it's on Amazon Prime, if I remember what he told me correctly. So if you've got that, maybe you can check it out. And maybe we can even do a Zoom watching with a movie party or something. I'll look into that, okay? Hope you have a good rest of your day. Don't forget to study those vocab words for the test on Tuesday. Have a good day.